Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, Northside Numbers Game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, with an exciting array of shows, including the Bleacher Bunch, the Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, Baseball Rabbit Hole, and Bricks Behind the Ivy. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and I will be closing down my Patreon. We'll be moving everything to the Bleacher Bunch Patreon feed, so you can find that at patreon.com/bleacherbunch, and you can support the show in a lot of different ways. We have a lot of support levels. Please check it out. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. The spin on the baseball metric, OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it, please drop a review wherever it is you get your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. It's February 27th and the Cubs can't seem to lose a game in spring training. What is going on? With Justin Turner on board and the offseason pretty much complete, let's look back and grade it out. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Welcome to episode 104. Let's talk about the number 4 for today's episode. I'm going to go jersey number here, but it's been a wasteland for the Cubs this decade. You had Johnny Vargas and Eric Sogard in 2021 wearing number 4. Ildemaro Vargas and Nelson Velazquez in 2022. And then since then, it's been split by Nelly and Alexander Canario. And really, that just kind of sums up Jed Hoyer baseball since Jed took over as the front office. You have some middle infield depth misses with Vargas, Sogard, and Vargas. And you had some young kids that came up and didn't really probably get an appropriate chance to play. Nelson Velazquez got some run in 2022, but not probably as much as he should have, given where the Cubs were that year. And Alexander Canario, in fairness, really got sidelined. He had that huge injury after the 2022 season before 2023. I think probably he would have been traded that offseason, probably gotten some pretty good value back. He's a guy with big power. The limited time he was in Chicago, he showed that. He had the classic hit a grand slam, go sit for a while. But really, he and Velazquez never really quite came on. Velazquez was traded for Jose Cuas, so that turned out to be a giant bag of nothing. And now Alexander Canario was traded to the Mets for the famed cash considerations. Again, largely a big bag of nothing. I wish the best for Canario. He's had a hard road back from that injury. I mean, that was just a brutal injury. Tore up his leg, hurt his shoulder. Like it was brutal. But now, where do the Cubs go at number 4? Well, we'll see. Maybe the Cubs have their answer now. Pete Crow-Armstrong announced this week he was going to wear number 4 going forward. So he's done with the 52, and he's going to number 4. Let's hope good things are in front of him. So this week I want to get in. It's been 2 weeks. I've had a busy work schedule, busy stuff going at home. Didn't get a chance last week. I had to prep for hosting the big show on Bleacher Bunch on Thursday night. Hopefully some of you check that out. So I apologize for not getting an episode out last week. Although really nothing changed other than games starting. This week I had oral surgery on Tuesday, got 4 wisdom teeth pulled. So this is really the first day I can talk coherently, and we'll see how long either my voice or my ability to actually enunciate words lasts. If you're part of the Bleacher Bunch Discord, I did post a little sample of my ability to speak clearly on Tuesday when I still had a little anesthesia in me and a mouthful of gauze. So that was probably not worth listening to, and I'm not going to drop it in this episode. But this week, let's start with Justin Turner. So this week I want to talk about the offseason. I want to talk about the ability of the Cubs to get some things done and grade what they've done this offseason. Justin Turner was the last move. Justin Turner was a signing I talked about in episode 103 a couple weeks ago when I talked about the bench. I was laying out the bench. At that point, Alex Bregman still had not signed. I think it was the very next day after I recorded that he signed with Boston. So I evaluated the bench with Bregman, so that would put Matt Shaw on the bench, and I evaluated the bench without Bregman, which would put Shaw in play. And then I talked about a handful of guys who could potentially be one more veteran bat added. Justin Turner was one of those. And I think in some ways, Justin Turner was maybe the best option. He's a guy who continues to rake. He'll be 40 this year. But the dude still hits. I mean, he hit really well last year, got 600 plate appearances between Toronto and Seattle. Put up really good numbers. You can expect him to be able to fill in off the bench. He can, if there's an injury to the outfield, Seiya Suzuki probably goes to play outfield. Justin Turner maybe steps in at DH. Now with Matt Shaw struggling with the oblique injury, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, he's taken more reps at third base. He hasn't really played much third base since 2022, so I wouldn't expect a whole lot there. But the Cubs do have a number of people who can play that position. Gage Workman, Vidal Brujan, John Birdie, Benjamin Cowles at AAA, James Triantos might be able to in a pinch if things really got dicey. But also, I'm not sure Matt Shaw is going to be out that long. So I've been hearing the updates on him, and I'm still reasonably optimistic. He might start the season on the injured list. We'll see. But I think there's still a chance he's ready for the domestic opening day, which is a week after the 2 games in Japan when the Cubs play the Dodgers. So we'll see. Nico Horner's in a similar boat. I was listening to Northside Territory with Sahad Sharma today, and it sounds like Nico Horner really is looking good. It sounds like probably he will not be ready for Japan, but probably out of precaution. I mean, when you get down to it, the opening series in Japan is a big deal. This is a big deal because you're playing in front of a foreign audience. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Shohei Ohtani, Roki Sasaki, Seiya Suzuki, Shota Imanaga all get to play in front of their home fans. And it's great. It's a big opener. Dodgers are the defending champions. The Cubs are a team that's expected to compete for playoff position. So it's a good opening series to start. At the end of the day, it's game 1 and 2 of 162. So I don't think there's a need to potentially get a starting pitcher injured by pushing them too deep in the first game. Or if a guy is not quite game ready, probably hold him back. And the Cubs are going to have some roster choices. So the way this series works, credit to Sahadov, he clarified it for me on that episode. The Cubs get to take 31 players to Japan. So they'll have the 26-man active roster for games 1 and 2. And they'll have a 5-man taxi squad because they're going to play some additional exhibition games in Japan. Sorry, I'm still a little bit foggy from all the surgery stuff this week. So my mind is not working quite as fast as it probably should today. But they're going to go through and they can take their 31 players. They pick their 26 for the 2 games. If somebody gets injured, they can throw somebody in the injured list, pull somebody off the taxi squad and go. But it also means the Cubs do not have to they don't have to send guys down. They don't have to make option decisions. So if Keegan Thompson as I understand it, Keegan Thompson has no options. The Cubs can take him to Tokyo, and that's good enough. They don't necessarily have to have him on the 26-man roster for those 2 games. That's at least my understanding. The decision on whether to carry Keegan Thompson into the season has to be made before the Cubs start the series against Arizona. And similarly, all the players who will get optioned down, we saw Owen Casey get optioned down, Brandon Birdsell, a number of guys got optioned down earlier this week. We'll start to see those happening before opening day, and some of those final decisions can get pushed right up to that last minute. So I think the Cubs are going to go, and they'll go without, it sounds like they're going to be without Matt Shaw, and pretty good chance they'll be without Nico Horner for that first series. So what does that line up? Well, let's first talk through where the Cubs were at the end of last offseason. So here are the guys that the Cubs have gotten rid of. They traded Matt Mervis to Miami for Vidal Brujan. They traded Cody Bellinger for Cash and Cody Poteet to the Yankees. They traded Itzhak Paredes and Hayden Wesneski along with Cam Smith in the deal for Michael Tucker. Michael Tucker? That's a different Tucker. Kyle Tucker. See, my brain is definitely still a little bit fried today. Kyle Hendricks left as a free agent. He signed with the Angels. And the Cubs cut ties with Yency Almonte, Patrick Wisdom, David Bodie, Nick Madrigal. Patrick Wisdom's playing in Korea. Nick Madrigal's now a Met. David Bodie's with the Dodgers. Luis Vazquez, I think, is a Met. I can't remember. Edward Alzolay is a Met. Miles Mastroboni got traded to Seattle. Mike Tauchman is now a White Sox. Drew Smyly is gone. Sean Armstrong is gone. Colton Brewer is gone. Jorge Lopez is gone. And Oli Paredes is gone. And Trey Wingenter is gone. So all those guys are gone. We've talked about that a lot over the offseason. The Cubs wiped out their bench. Anybody who played third base last year, gone. Now we can add Alexander Canario to that list. He's gone. And the Cubs additions are in no particular order: Justin Turner, Ryan Brazier, Ryan Presley, Colin Ray, Caleb Tealbar, Vidal Brujan, Cody Poteet, Kyle Tucker, Carson Kelly, Eli Morgan, John Birdie, Gage Workman, and Matthew Boyd. So let's think about that in terms of what the Cubs needed going into this offseason. So the Cubs go in, and let me get the right spreadsheet up here. I cannot read my own typing, apparently. So we bring this up and we look at the roster. And what the Cubs really have is, let's go through the position players first. You've got Miguel Amaya probably starting at catcher, splitting time with Carson Kelly. Carson Kelly is a very good backup. It could wind up being a split time decision. Miguel Amaya is off to a really good start in spring training so far. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So hopefully he can just take the job, run with it, and then he and Carson Kelly can divide up time. Michael Busch is your first baseman. Nico Horner, if he opens the season, is playing second base. Dansby Swanson at short. Penciling in Matt Shaw at third base, hopefully by the Arizona series, but probably not for that first round. Ian Happen left, PCA in center, Kyle Tucker in right field, likely with Seiya Suzuki as the fourth outfielder in DH. Now the bench, with Canario gone, that kind of clears things up. You're probably looking at John Birdie, Gage Workman, Carson Kelly, and Justin Turner. Now that's with Matt Shaw and Nico Horner on the roster. If they are on the injured list, then you're probably putting Gage Workman at third base. Maybe you're putting between Birdie and Workman, you're probably putting one at third base, one at second base. And then you've got two more roster spots. So you look at some of the guys who are over on the side. Maybe that opens a path for Kevin Alcantara to at least get a little run early in the season. There's also potentially Benjamin Cowles, Vidal Brujan probably takes one of those spots. Nicky Lopez is off to a good start. So I would say if Nico and Shaw start the season on the injured list, then you're probably looking at Vidal Brujan and potentially Kevin Alcantara as your bench. Alcantara could give you that bat. He's really playing well this preseason so far in spring training. So what does that do? And let's go through the rotation for my assumptions. Right now, you would have Justin Steele. Well, Shota Imanaga is going to start opening day. So you've got Shota, Steele, Jameson Taillon, Matthew Boyd probably slots in 4. And number 5 is up in the air. Javier Assad is dealing with an oblique issue as well, and it's starting to look like he's not going to be ready to start the season. But the Cubs have that depth. I would pencil in probably Colin Ray as the 5th starter at this point. There's a chance for Ben Brown to come and win the job. There are a lot of options. The Cubs have Ray, and they have Cody Poteet could do it. Potentially Caleb Killian, Ben Brown. Like, there are a number of guys. Brad Keller looks really good so far in spring training. The Cubs have options there, and we'll see what direction they wind up going. The thing with Keller, he's not on the 40-man roster, but there are going to be some other moves. And for the bullpen right now, I think you probably pencil in Tyson Miller, Porter Hodge, Ryan Presley. Presley's probably going to be your starter closer, with Hodge pushing him really close. I'm going to err on the side of Keegan Thompson starting the season with the Cubs. We'll see what he does through all of spring training, see if he gets a pitch in Japan at all. I think he's a guy who's on a short leash. He has no options. He can't go back to Iowa. So if he struggles, he's going to wind up traded, DFA'd, something like that. I think Eli Morgan is going to be in this bullpen. If he's healthy and he's effective in spring training, Julian Merriweather is going to be in this bullpen. Similar to Thompson, he doesn't have options. So he is in or he's out. There's no other option than that. Caleb Tealbar is going to be the lefty in the rotation, or lefty in the bullpen. And then I had Javier Assad slated for the bullpen before his injury came out. Then you start looking at, I forgot to mention Jordan Wicks, obviously, for the 5th starter role. Then if Assad doesn't start the season with the Cubs, if he starts on the injured list, then you're probably looking at potentially Luke Little. You could be looking at Jack Neely, Nate Pearson. There are a number of options there for that bullpen role. Question with Pearson is, what are the Cubs going to ask him to do? There's been chatter and talk about him potentially being a starting pitcher, and we've seen a number of guys go from those late inning closer roles to the starting rotation. Jordan Hicks did it last year with some success. There have been several other guys. A couple other guys are trying it this year. So that's something that could work. But if, it may also mean that they just for now want to have him as a long man. Maybe he's a guy that goes out and he works 2 to 3 innings, sits a few days, does it again. That's another way to stretch a guy out. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the minor leagues. Ben Brown is very interesting in that bullpen. So again, it depends on where they want Brown to be. Do they want Brown to start? And if so, is he ready to compete for number 5? Or do they want to send him to Iowa, let him kind of stretch out? Because he pitched the other day. He pitched reasonably well. He has not pitched since last May in a game. So he had that growth on his neck. Sahadev Sharma, again, I'll give him credit. He's excellent. Give a pretty good breakdown of what that injury was. It's basically bone on bone growing in his neck. And all of a sudden one day it kind of just went away as the doctors expected. But the Cubs took precautions, shut him down last year. He seems fine now. He was cleared for a normal offseason. He's having a normal spring. It looks like he's throwing all of his pitches, including a changeup. So good to see from him. We'll see where the Cubs put him. So that kind of lays out the roster. And coming into this offseason, I thought the Cubs needed starting pitcher depth. We saw last year the top of the rotation was pretty solid. Really, the whole rotation was pretty good. But there were issues. You lose Kyle Hendricks, which is a big loss from a fan and familiarity and past history standpoint. But Kyle Hendricks was not great last year. I'm so glad he got to go out the way he did. He did have some good runs last season. But he did not have the season, certainly, anybody was looking for, let alone. So they need depth there. They completely revamped the bullpen in season last year, adding Jorge Lopez and Tyson Miller and trading for Nate Pearson and Jack Neely and just picking up a variety of guys, bringing up Porter Hodge. We saw Luke Little go through some struggles and then look really good by the time he got hurt. So I don't know Little's full health status at this point, but I'm hoping he's back competing for a major job in that bullpen, but sometime during the first half of the season, and maybe sooner. I mean, if he can be ready for opening day, that's all the better. So let's address the pitching. So what did the Cubs do? I know a lot of us wanted the Cubs to go get a high-level starting pitcher, go get Corbin Burnes. I personally advocated for Walker Buehler. I thought Walker Buehler would be an excellent pickup, and for who you could potentially be getting, be a pretty rock-solid gamble on a shorter-term deal. He's a guy that's come off a couple seasons with big injuries, but when he's at his best, he's a really, really good pitcher. He's dynamic, throws hard, the kind of starter this team could use, and he gives you another potential ace. Now, Shota threw like an ace last year. I'm not sure that's going to hold. I think Shota is very good. I think he's going to continue to be a very good pitcher. I just know how Wrigley Field played last year, and I expect that to take a step back. I know he's a homer-prone pitcher. He's 31 as opposed to 30, which is not huge on the aging curve. It's not like suddenly Shota Imanaga is 38 years old. But he's getting old, a little more familiar. He really does study. He really does work hitters. So he's not going to have a bad season. I think he's going to be an above average pitcher. He could potentially even be a number 2, number 3 starter on a playoff team. I just don't think he's going to pitch as he pitched so well last year. I think it's going to be really hard to match. Justin Steele had a bit of a rough year last year. Obviously, he got hurt on opening day, missed some time, kind of struggled coming back, finding his spots, had a couple other points during the season where he was a little bit dinged up. But when he was healthy, he continued to throw really well. And I think Justin Steele is a guy that you can count on. Is he a true ace in the sense of, I think this talk is overblown. I talk about it from time to time. I think there are probably at any given point about 15, maybe 20 really true number ones in baseball. I think the Dodgers right now probably have 4. So obviously we all want the Cubs to spend like the Dodgers, but that ship has sailed, and I'm not talking anymore about Tom Ricketts in this episode. So I'm not going there, but you're looking at guys who would be effectively considered an ace on virtually any staff. So these are the elite of the elite. Not every team is going to have one. Some teams have more than one. So top 10, 15, maybe 20. I think 20 is stretching it. That top 15 is probably pretty good. Justin Steele works himself into the back end of that top 15. Maybe pushes top 10 when he's at his best. I think he can be considered a number 1. He's maybe, but he's kind of on that line. If he's not fully healthy, he's not quite going to be there. We'll see what kind of year he has. So the Cubs don't really have that top guy. The Cubs have Certainly, Justin Steele is a rock solid number 2. He's a low end number 1, rock solid number 2. Shota Imanaga pitched like an ace last year, absolutely. I expect him to pull back, probably be more like a 2-3. But he was projected to come over to Major League Baseball to be a middle of the rotation starter with a little upside. So I think the Cubs are still getting more than they bargained for when they brought him. Jameson Taillon is a rock solid middle of the rotation starting pitcher. He's a guy. One thing I've heard put well over the years is it's not so much 1, 2, 3, or 4, because what's the difference between a 2 and a 3 sometimes, or 3 and a 4, or sometimes even a 3 and a 5? Who would you trust to start in a playoff game? And right now, I would have full faith in Justin Steele, full faith in Shota Imanaga, full faith in Jameson Taillon. So I think Taillon rolls in at that 3. And then you look at, so the Cubs didn't add upside, but the Cubs did add depth. And so the Cubs added Matthew Boyd, who is coming off a big injury, but came back at the end of last season, helped Cleveland down the stretch. He threw in about 8 games in the regular season and then threw some more in the playoffs. He looked really, really good. And I think he's a guy that certainly the Cubs pitching infrastructure is excited about. I think he has some upside. He was going to slot in as their number 4 starter. If he's healthy, he could absolutely pitch higher than that. So I did really like that move this offseason. And then Colin Ray is a depth at. Colin Ray basically was Jed saying, we have a lot of guys coming off really big injuries last year. So if I go through this, Ben Brown missed more than half the season. Jordan Wicks missed more than half the season. You might be stretching Canario out. Cade Horton missed a chunk of the season. Brandon Birdsell is starting this season with his own shoulder injury. So there are a lot of guys in this group who were not able to pitch full seasons last year. And Colin Ray threw 160 innings for Milwaukee. He's a guy, again, we're talking number 5 starter. We're not talking a guy that has to have a sub-3 ERA, a guy who's going to go shut down every time he comes up, stop a losing streak. Like that's the top of your rotation. Colin Ray has the ability to give you depth of innings at his spot in the rotation. I think that's really valuable with this team. I think a lot of other guys, Jordan Wicks, even maybe Cody Poteet, certainly Ben Brown, potentially Nate Pearson, certainly Cade Horton if he's healthy, Brandon Birdsell if he gets back to action. There are a number of other guys that give you potentially more upside, but the ability for Colin Ray to go out there and take the ball every 5 and go serve as a 6th starter if somebody else comes back and is in the mix is valuable. And he can flip to the bullpen too, so he can be a long guy, swing guy out of the bullpen. So on the whole, on the rotation, I certainly can't give it an A. I would have liked to see them add, I would have loved Corbin Burns. I would have loved Walker Buehler, a number of other guys as well. But I'm going to give this probably a B- on the rotation. I think the Cubs have a lot of upside arms. I think Matthew Boyd is another upside arm. So I think on that front, I can't give them anything below a C. I think they made the rotation better by making it deeper. To get into that B+, A, whatever territory would have to be a higher upside guy than Matthew Boyd. But in some ways I do like what the Cubs did this offseason. So I'm going to go kind of B- on the starting rotation. So let's go bullpen. Last year's bullpen to start the season was an abject fail. I was excited about Adbert Alzolay being the closer. In retrospect, I don't think he was ever healthy. I think he was definitely injured to end the 2023 season. I think taking time off, trying to work through it, try to do some things without surgery made a lot of sense. And he threw in spring training. At times he looked good. But then once the season started, he just was not himself. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he was healthy to start the season, then subsequently got injured. But whatever the case is, he was ineffective, blew way too many saves early in the season. That really cost the Cubs a lot. The Cubs could have had a better April. They went 14-13, if I remember right. Maybe that was the year before, 15-12 maybe. But they were solid in April. And then in May and June were complete disasters. May was really when Alzolay really went south. He was hurt. I think Julian Merriweather was closer number 2. He was never right last season. Yancy Almonte was supposed to be in the mix. He looked really good until he got hurt, and then he missed the rest of the season, which of course thrust Hector Neris into the closer role, where I wouldn't go so far as to say he's terrible. I think he caught maybe a little too much flack on Cubs social media or among Cubs fans, but it was not strong. He was shaky throughout the season. And the Cubs eventually had to redo it. Porter Hodge came up, looked really good. Jack Neely, Nate Pearson, Tyson Miller came in a deal with Seattle, was really good. But the Cubs still needed more depth because we don't know what Julian Merriweather is going to be able to give this year. Keegan Thompson has been up and down. When he's been on, he's been very good. And when he's not, he's really, really not been good. Tyson Miller was really effective last year. I think he's a good pitcher. He has a good career track record. He's not a dominant guy. He throws in the low 90s. He's not going to get a ton of strikeouts. He's effective, and you need that in your bullpen. But to look at him and say he's the eighth inning guy is not really ideally what you want. Now, if he's there, Javier Assad is strong out of both the bullpen and the rotation, so I'd like that. I do wish the Cubs would have gone higher level on a lefty. I like Caleb Thielbar. I think he's going to have a good season with the Cubs. I see some of the reasons why the Cubs picked him up. Tyler Zombro seems to really like him, and I think he fits what the Cubs are doing. But the Cubs had some shots at some other lefties. And in fairness, they took some shots. I mean, they went, technically, if you want to look at net present value, they outbid the Dodgers for Tanner Scott. And they certainly offered a deal for Tanner Scott that I thought Jed Hoyer would effectively never give a reliever. They didn't get him, so it came up short, just like they came up short with Alex Bregman. And we can litigate that forever, but that's the bullpen we have. There is some depth. Jordan Wicks could pitch in the bullpen. Ben Brown could pitch in the bullpen. Nate Pearson might be in this bullpen to start the season. There are a number of guys that can serve there. Ethan Roberts, we'll see if he makes it through the season. Now back to the starting pitchers for 1 second. Brad Keller, who I mentioned earlier in the show, they see him as a potential starting pitcher option, and he's looked good so far this offseason. So he's not on the 40-man. I don't know. Typically, those guys who sign on minor league contracts with a camp invite have some sort of opt-out date. Sometimes it's before opening day. Often it's May 15th, June 1st, June 15th, just to give the guy a chance to pitch, take a minor league assignment, kind of show the organization what he has. And then at some point, he has the chance to say, you know what, I'm not advancing here. I'm going to go be a free agent and go try to catch on somewhere else. But I think, so the moves the Cubs did make in this rotation that I liked, Ryan Presley, we'll see how that trade works out. The Cubs did give up a fair amount of value for him, but I like the Ryan Presley addition. I like Porter Hodge's closer. I've talked about that many times. I think he is absolutely the closer of the future, or certainly could be. But Ryan Presley is a guy who has saved so many big games for Houston over this great playoff run that they've had. And last year he wasn't himself, and some of that he's said was because the Astros went out and got Josh Hader, and all of a sudden he was slotted to the eighth inning. He felt there was some ego bruise there, and he had a rough adjustment to that eighth inning. Now, coming over to the Cubs have told him he gets to compete for the closer role. I would expect he's probably going to be the closer to start the season, but certainly the Cubs have closer 1, closer 2 in Presley and Hodge at this point. I really like Hodge's stuff. I really, really like the fact that Porter Hodge has a chance to be with Ryan Presley in that bullpen every day. He gets to see what a guy of Ryan Presley's caliber does to get himself ready, to keep himself ready, to be mentally sharp. And that's, I think, going to be a really good opportunity for Porter Hodge to soak up and learn a lot of lessons. Caleb Thielbar, I said, he gives the Cubs a lefty presence. Well, I think he can be effective. We'll see how that goes. I do like Eli Morgan out of the bullpen. He looked really good for the the Guardians last year. After surgery, I just watched Major League the other day, so I do have Indians on the brain. I think Eli Morgan is a guy who has some really interesting stuff. Again, not a hard thrower, but I think he's really effective, and we'll see how this goes. I think in terms of depth now, the Cubs have a lot of arms. They've got, as I slotted in the bullpen I read, that still leaves potentially Jordan Wicks, Cody Poteet, Javier Assad, Caleb Killian, Jack Neely, Luke Little, Gavin Hollowell, Ethan Roberts, Daniel Palencia, and Ben Brown as bullpen depth, assuming Nate Pearson takes the Javier Assad spot. And this is probably more depth than I've seen the Cubs have in the bullpen maybe in my lifetime. Certainly the most depth they've had of big dudes who throw hard, which has been sorely lacking for the Cubs over the past number of years. And so I got to give this one, I'm going to give it a B. I would have liked to have seen the Cubs go a little bit higher end on at least one more reliever. And self-plug here, in the next couple weeks before the Cubs open with LA and Japan, Sarah Sanchez and I are going to go through and recreate the episode we did at the end of this past season where we recreated the 2023 offseason. We are going to go and say what we would have done with the money that was available to spend this offseason, and we'll see what kind of roster Sarah and I are able to put together. We both would have made some different choices. But so right now we're at a B- for the rotation. I'll say a solid B on the bullpen. And let's look at the lineup. So there weren't a lot of spots in the regular everyday lineup, but the Cubs needed to add a big bat, and they had to completely overhaul their bench. And the Cubs went through. We'll see what happens. They had a shot at some third baseman. They traded Itzhak Paredes away along with Hayden Wesneski to go get that big one move. Kyle Tucker is an elite bat. He is a top 10, 15 hitter in all of baseball. He is somebody who will elevate this lineup as long as he's healthy and doing what he typically does. He is going to be a force in this lineup. He's going to make everybody around him better. All of a sudden now, if you're slotting Kyle Tucker in second, hitting, say, a third, Ian Happ batting leadoff, Ian Happ is going to take his pitches and he's going to take his walks. And that could wind up putting a lot of guys on base for Kyle Tucker. And then Kyle Tucker's protected by Seiya Suzuki, who put up a 138 WRC plus last season. That could be a really strong top three for this Cubs lineup. Helps everybody else slot in better later. The Cubs did have an opportunity to get Alex Bregman. Now, the Cubs did not offer as much in terms of years, AAV, or total value, and so they kind of lost that deal. I don't know where the Cubs sat on budget. I don't know how far Jed was able to go. It sounds like this is one move where Tom may have stepped in and still left a cap. The Cubs are, but the Cubs have also made it very clear that they were perfectly okay proceeding with giving Matt Shaw the third base job to open the 2024 season. We'll see with his oblique how fast he can come back. I'm hopeful he can open that Arizona series. So really third base and the one big bat, and basically they replaced Cody Bellinger with Kyle Tucker, which is absolutely an upgrade. I've seen some talk online about it not being that much of an upgrade. It's a big upgrade. I like Cody Bellinger. I think he's going to have a good year in New York. I think he would have been fine. He would have been an above average hitter in Chicago for sure. And the Cubs probably could have found a way to get appropriate playing time for Bush and Bellinger and Seiya and Tucker. They would have to get pretty creative about it, but they could have made it work. They didn't. So that's gone. So I will give them an A for going to get Kyle Tucker. If they could get him extended or if they bring him back, then all of a sudden that trade becomes an A+. But we'll see. Right now, I'm going to grade this on this season for the 2024 season. Because we're in a situation where the Cubs have not made the playoffs since 2020. That year was obviously super wonky, and we'll see where things wind up going. But if the Cubs are able to lock up Tucker long term, whether it's extending him or whether it's basically selling him on being a Cub all season, he wants to test out free agency, and the Cubs come and drop the big bag on him, then that's a huge deal. Then all of a sudden it's 100% worth giving up what they gave up to have Kyle Tucker for the remainder of the prime of his career. He's an amazing player. He's still pretty young on the free agent scale, and he's really good. So then you look at the bench, and now the addition of Kyle Tucker sort of pushes Seiya to the bench. Not really to the bench because he'll be that DH most of the time. And then depending on health of Horner and Shaw, Carson Kelly is a big upgrade over what the Cubs had at backup catcher last year. Gage Workman has looked really good in spring training so far. He's a big dude, big and strong, really athletic. He's had a plus glove all the way through the minor leagues, can play all over the field. So I think hopefully he's going to stick and the Cubs can keep him on the roster all season versus having to offer him back to Detroit. He could absolutely be a big upgrade over the Nick Madrigals and Miles Mastrobonis, that sort of thing. John Birdie is another guy on the bench that can give you a quality at bat. He's been around. He's 37. He's older, but he can still play a variety of positions. And some of these guys, Gage Workman, John Birdie, give you also some additional depth at shortstop. So the Cubs need to get Dansby Swanson and Nico Horner off their feet. I talked a lot about that in episode 1 of 3. And especially now with Nico potentially starting slow, they may want to give him a little extra rest just to make sure he doesn't aggravate anything and all that. So having some of these guys on the roster gives that depth, gives that flexibility. And I think this is the kind of bench that Craig Counsell likes to have. I think we're going to see a lot of these guys play. I think we're going to see a lot of these guys get regular time. And so then we look at Vidal Brujan. I've thought he was a pretty easy decision not to make the roster, but one, he's playing pretty well in spring training so far. Hit a home run the other day after talking to Sammy Sosa in the dugout. But if Nico Horner and or Matt Shaw start the season on the injured list, then Vidal Brujan probably does make it. Kevin Alcantara is really interesting. He's hitting 500 in the spring so far. He looks really good. He looks really comfortable. I think that's the biggest thing I can say about Gage Workman, Kevin Alcantara, Moises Ballesteros, some of these younger guys who are showing things in spring training. They look like they belong there. Now, they're absolutely going to have their learning curves. Just because you're hitting 600 in spring training doesn't mean you're going to tear it up all regular season. These guys might start out hot. They're going to get adjusted to. We saw that with Michael Busch. We've seen it with PCA. They're going to go through those anyway, but I really like what I see. They carry themselves the right way. They look like they belong out there, and they're playing with confidence. So as far as the bench goes, I'm going to give that an A-. You know, I like the Justin Turner. I think with Justin Turner and John Birdie, you have guys you can go to late in game situations where you've got runners in scoring position. You got to get a ball in play. And I think those are two guys you can go to get it. Gage Workman may help be that guy. Carson Kelly gives you good depth. I think Kevin Alcantara, if he starts the season on the roster, has a chance to be a guy that mix in a few times a week. Bring some energy, bring some swag, bring some riz to this lineup. And we'll see where it goes. But on the whole, I would give this offseason, I think I have to give it a B. I would give it a B. This team is better than they were last year. I'll go through as we get a little closer, see some of the final roster decisions. I think right now the Cubs, I think the Fangraphs projection that had them at 92 wins, blanking on it right now, it's probably a little high. But I think right now this team is an 89-90 win team. Not quite where I wanted them to be, particularly with some of the injuries starting the offseason, or starting the preseason. Excuse me. But they do absolutely have some much more depth than they had last year. They're going to have the ability to weather injuries better than they did last year. And I think that's really important. And as this team goes over 162, there will also be opportunities for some of the young players like Alcantara, like Owen Casey, Ben Cowles, Matt Shaw, and some of the pitchers to step up and elevate their profile. There will be those chances, and I hope some of them do. My mouth is still sore. I'm going to cut this one here. I want to get something out to you guys. Love having you guys listen and engage with me. Let me know what you think. How would you grade this offseason? Let me know. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts and share the episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS+. You can support the show, the entire Bleacher Bunch family, by going to patreon.com/BleacherBunch to help support all of our shows. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS+ podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!